Section 2, steps for meal planning. When I was deciding on how to best go about walking you step by step, how to do a meal plan, there's just a lot of different ways to do it. And I'm not going to say this is the best way. I'm going to say that this is one way to do it. And as I was thinking this through, I was like, well, how could I take individuals step by step through the process of meal planning? I've put together 4 steps for you here that we're going to run through. And if you use these steps in this process, you should be able to develop a plan for your athletes, for your clients. So let's look at these now. Steps for meal planning. I'm not going to say this is easy because it's not, but there's no real easy way to do this, right? The idea is you're going to put together a plan for your athletes, and then you're going to ask them to track what they're doing and then give them feedback and then tweak, as necessary. The first step is determining training load. And training load basically is the volume of work that your athletes are doing. Volume of work meaning, how many miles a week are they running? How many hours are they spending out on the practice field and on the court? That's training load. So determine the training load, because that's ultimately a big factor in determining the next step, which is the calorie level. You have your metabolic rate, your basal metabolic rate, right? Then you add in the calories from exercise, which essentially is the training load, and then the thermal effect of food. And that's how you get your calorie level. The next step would be to determine the amount of food from each group. And we'll show you how to do that. And then you're going to use some type of tracking form. And I'll give you a couple examples of how to do that coming up. In this first step, estimate the training load. You're looking at the volume, how much activity your athlete's doing over time. One of the things that you should notice is that your athletes are going to be training more in some parts of the season and less in other parts of the season. And one of the big mistakes that I see athletes making and folks who work with athletes is that they have them eating the same throughout the entire year. And that's not the right way to go about it, because you should fluctuate their calorie levels based on how much they train. And you could even do it on a daily basis, to be quite honest. And the biggest aspect to this that should change is their carbohydrate level. We'll see that the proteins and the fats stay relatively the same, but it's the carbohydrate, because that's what's really driving, and that's the fuel for activity, right? The main fuel for activity is carbohydrate. That introduces us to a topic then of what's called nutritional periodization. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this was coined back in, I believe, 2011 by Bob Seebahar, and I'll show you a chart from Bob's book here in just a minute. Basically, that's the idea, is that, for decades, periodized strength training, right? The Russians were doing this many moons ago. So where you're changing up the volume and intensity to try to peak right before your event. Well, the same thing should occur with your nutrition, right? The nutrition should not be the same throughout the entire year. And so the idea is to eat to match your training cycle, right? Eat to match your training cycle. This is from Seebahar's book in 2011, Nutritional Periodization. And what you see over here on the left are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. He basically divides it into 3 phases: the preparation phase, the competition phase, and the transition phase. The transition phase, let's just start with that. If you're unfamiliar with transition, basically that's the end of the season. This is where your athletes, they're finished their big event, they've finished their competitive season, and they're taking some time off. That could be a couple of weeks, it could be a month, right? Whatever it is, this is a time when they're going to stay active. They're just not going to be participating in their sport. This is the time when, calorie levels need to be dropped down a little bit. In particular, if you look at the carbohydrates here, he's recommending 3 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight, which is pretty low. But again, the activity level is not real high during this time, especially not compared to the peak training that your athletes will be doing. And then protein, he's recommending 1.2 to 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, and then fat 1 to 1.2. Again, remember, we were really looking at a minimum here of about 1. He's going a little below it here in this preparation phase. Preparation is basically the off season. As you start to get into the preseason, if you will, These are times when, so this is that's what he's calling the preparation phase. Without weight loss, if you were doing an endurance event, that could be the 16 weeks leading up to the event. 16 weeks would be the preparation phase. 20 weeks leading up to the event. If you look at the preparation without weight loss, then he's going anywhere from 4 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight, with protein on the order similar to the transition, 1.2 to 1.7, and anywhere from about 1 gram to 1.3 grams of fat per kilogram of body weight. If you are going to interested in losing a little weight, he's actually going to cut back a little bit on the carbohydrate, similar to the transition phase, and then bump up the protein, keep the fat pretty moderate here, around that 1 gram of fat per kilogram of body weight. And the biggest fluctuation is what you see is here in the competitive phase. In this competitive phase, you see a huge range, anywhere from 5 to 12 grams carbohydrate, per kilogram of body weight. And that just depends on how much work are your athletes doing. If you're an endurance athlete that's training 4 or 5 hours a day, then you need to be closer to that 12. If you're a strength and power athlete, you're probably going to be somewhere around 7 to 9, somewhere along those lines. Again, it may also depend, it really does depend on the phase of training. Are you, in this competitive phase, how much work are you really doing? You can see the protein needs increase a little bit because you are doing more work, 1.7 to 2.0 here he's recommending, and then fat, bumping up the fat also, so 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. And this is just one way to do it. We've talked about already the way that I think it was in Module 3, we looked at this, where we have our metabolic rate and we take the calories from exercise and the thermal effect of food. You can do that, and that works. You're just trying to come up with a calorie level that's going to be best for your athlete to start with, and then you're going to manipulate that over time. The biggest thing that's going to go up is the calorie level when you from exercise. And then once you estimate the calorie needs for your athletes, then the next step is to determine the amount of food from each group. This is from Choose My Plate, and you can go online and find this. You'll have no problem doing that. What this does is this gives you a calorie level up at the top, and then gives you the foods and the groups and how much you need of each group here in the column. If I were going to eat 2,000 calorie diet, this is what I would need. I would need 2 cups of fruits. I need 2.5 cups of vegetables, 6 ounces of grain, 5.5 ounces of meat, 3 cups of milk. This really kind of sets you up being able to put together a food plan for them. Again, the biggest challenge with this using My Plate is that it only really goes to 3,200 calories. And sometimes your athletes, some of the bigger athletes for sure, will need a lot more than that. What you may have to do, and I guess this is the best way to go about it, is just say, hey, if I'm doing 2,000 calories, if I need 4,000 calories, then I just double this 2,000 calories and do 4 cups of fruit and 5 cups of vegetables and 12 ounces or 12 servings of grain, right, throughout the day. So you just double this would probably be the best way to go about it. And then once you've done that, and you've given them a food plan, then they have to track, right? What are they doing right now? And then we try to adapt that. Back in the old days, we used to keep track of our diet just by on a paper and pencil. We don't really do that anymore. If you're looking at this individual, writing down every single thing here that they're eating, and then eventually they get down, their goal is 1,500 calories, but look, they almost there at 23. And they got the grams of protein here. You got to write down everything that you eat, and the best thing to do now, especially since we've got our apps on our phones, is just to write it down right then. Because if you're like anything like me, I tend to forget pretty quickly. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast, lunch, or dinner yesterday, right? So it really becomes a challenge. Those are the 4 steps. Determine training load, develop a calorie level, determine the number of items from each food group, and then number 4, track the foods that you're consuming. So let's do a little case study here. And let's say we got a 27-year-old Division III soccer player and 23% body fat. The season just ended. Okay, so let's say the season, that's important to know where they at in their training. The season just ended, they're in transition phase. We walk through steps 1 and 2, the training phase and energy needs, then a training load. I used Cunningham's equation here because we know we're percent body fat, and we walk through this calculation and we come up with about 2,000 calories using Cunningham. And then I do the same thing with Harris Benedict. I just want to show you how this works. Harris Benedict came up with a little less, about 1850. Once you do the math, and by the way, calories through exercise, I'm going to assume that this soccer gal is still being somewhat active, and so I'm going to give her, let's say she's going out and she's burning 300 calories through exercise per day, which is, a lot less than what she would be doing if she was in season where they were on the practice field 2 or 3 hours, playing soccer. So I just gave her 300 calories here from exercise. This is going to be pretty close. And if you use Siebehar's method, where you're taking, and if I go back, let's see if I can go back here. If I use Siebehar's method in transition, I'm using these numbers to plug in here based on, grams of carbohydrate, protein, and fat per kilogram of body weight. And I do this math, it comes up to be about 1,800. So I'm anywhere between 1,800 and about 2,000 calories. 200 calorie difference is not that big a deal. Pick one of these and stick with it. And because I just used the Cunningham, and all these are really kind of close to 2,000, I just went ahead for the meal pattern and came up with 2,000 for you here. Now, you could have used 1,800, and there's not going to be just a huge difference, right, between those two. So what that would mean is that you would have 2 cups of fruit, 2.5 cups of vegetables. Actually, what I picked earlier, as I was going through, 6 ounces of grains and 6 ounces of meat. So you get the idea. This gives them something to shoot for, and this is important, right? When you're working with athletes, they need goals. And then what you have to do is track it. And this is the challenging part. And again, remember, when we're looking at sport nutrition, this is, especially when you're working with athletes, some of it's science, no question about it, but some of it's an art in learning how to work with athletes and trying to get this nutrition plan put together, and having your athletes follow this is definitely going to be a challenge. But there's no easy way to do it. There are other ways to do it, but none of them are really easy, right? What you would do is, and I'll have this as a download. If you look below this video, I'll have this as a download so that you can, I like this strategy here. So what I've got is just a blank page that has the diet plan, breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, and you can take to this and add if you want to, if your athletes are needing to eat more. This would be the plan, just as I showed you a second ago. 6 ounces of grain, 5 servings of vegetables, 4 servings of fruit, 5.5 ounces of meat. Walking through this, let me go ahead and skip to the next slide. What I'm doing here is I'm just putting in if you want to call it check marks or numbers, based on how many servings that they got for that particular lunch, for that particular meal. So here's an example. I had them track what they're doing. You got to, translate the plan to, the daily life. So they track what they're doing. And let's say they have, the Honey Nut Cheerios for breakfast. They have a banana, half a cup of orange juice, and 1 cup of milk. If you go back and we look at how we've put this in, there's your Cheerios, 1, serving of grain. Your fruit, we had 1 banana and half a cup of orange juice. Boom, there's your 2 fruits. And then here's your dairy here for the milk. And you would do the same thing for every meal and even the snacks. Again, I set this up so it's just perfect. Your athletes may not be this perfect, but in teaching them how to record their foods is a challenge too, that you definitely have to work with them on. But this is how you do it. And I've got another download below this video for you, and this download is from Choose My Plate, because what you can do from Choose My Plate is there are templates already available for all these different meal plans. So you could pick out the 3,000 calorie meal plan, print that out, give that to your athletes, because it lines it out for them. It tells them exactly what they need to be, the servings from each group that they need to be consuming. And I'll have this, like I said, as a download below. And it's really helpful. So those are the steps. And, what we're really trying to do and get across to your athletes is you're just trying to eat a healthful diet. You're just trying to eat a variety of different foods from the different food groups. And with breakfast, here's just some breakfast ideas. And we know breakfast is extremely important. Being creative sometimes, especially for athletes, if you're working with college athletes, sometimes leftovers for dinner can make the best breakfast, So you just have to be creative. Just to give you some examples: whole grain waffles with some maple syrup, whole grain toast with some fruit spread, just a couple of packets of oatmeal, something's better than nothing. Fruit smoothies. I know a lot of my athletes and individuals I work with really enjoy the smoothies for breakfast. And making sure, like if we're talking about some of the things we learned in the previous modules, having some protein, making sure you're trying to get some protein in for breakfast, because it's about 25 to 30 grams or so per meal is a good mark to shoot for. So these are just some examples for breakfast. And then for lunch, again, you're just trying to be balanced. Like this guy in the picture, he's not so balanced, right? He's eating his bread over here. He's got his pasta. Then he's hiding his French fries over here in the corner. He must have had a good workout. The idea is, like I said, just to be balanced. So if we look at this, a grilled chicken sandwich with baked potato, veggies, iced tea, and a fruit cup. So you've got, in your sandwich, you've got your grains, right, with the bread. You've got your protein with the meat, with the chicken. You've got a starch with the potato, and then the veggies and fruit. So it's pretty balanced. And that's what you're really shooting for. For dinner, the same thing. You see this guy eating a salad for dinner. That's something I need to work on myself, but this is a great option. Bean burrito, baked chips, salsa. It doesn't have to be perfect. So the bean burrito, you've got your tortillas, your grains, you've got your protein in your beans. You're eating some salsa from fruit juice. So you're trying to be balanced here. And snacking is important. Having good snacks available and on hand can definitely boost your energy and help you concentrate and fuel for those workouts that are coming up, say in the afternoon or later in the evening. Again, the biggest thing is to plan ahead as you're planning your snacks. So grapes and pretzels and trail mix. You just have to be careful with the trail mix and some of the other nuts, is that it can be higher in calories. Snack in a smart way. This is definitely not healthy snacking, and you can tell she's busted here, eating the donuts. So in this section, we've really kind of gotten into the meat of it, where you're going to try to put together a plan for your athletes. It's not easy, like I said, but it is doable. You can do this using those 4 steps that we've talked about. You can make this happen for your athletes. And in our next section, we're going to look at glycogen loading. We're going to start talking about what are you going to do, in the days before your competition, the days before your big event. We're going to look at that in our next section.